Hey, welcome back to another episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, before we dive into, I think one of the coolest stories we're going to cover this season, Farmer's Dog, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners that love dogs or cats are familiar with. But before we dive into this story, can you give those first-time listeners a quick overview of what E-commerce on Tap is?
Yeah, we're so grateful that you joined us. But basically, what we do is we pick a well-known company, we tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and then give our perspective on what we would do to either fix that company or to maximize their exit potential.
Yeah, and we have a lot of fun doing it. And so before we dive into the Farmer's Dog, let's talk about little tidbits that caught our eye this week. For me, it was about my favorite chip brand, Siete Chips, has gotten acquired by PepsiCo for $1.2 billion. And number one, it's just an incredible story. If you look at the founding story of Siete, it was started by a family. One of their family members had an autoimmune disease where she couldn't have grains, and a lot of chips have grains in it. And so they started Siete. This year, they said they'll do about $500 million in revenue.
Wow.
And it's just this incredible story. I think it was founded in 2014, but I mean, I would love to cover them on e-commerce on tap. I think that'd be a great episode. And I'm a little worried by this acquisition because PepsiCo kind of sometimes has this, flaw of adjusting formulas and brand ethos and all of that post acquisition. But, from what I've read, they're planning to, stick to the way Siete is being made and stay true to the brand ethos. So I'm excited for that family and just that team. I mean, what an incredible outcome.
Yeah, if we do an episode on Siete, then I think we're going to have your food groups covered between chips and liquid death.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Aaron, I know you have a lot to say about the port strike, which has caught pretty much everyone's eye in the supply chain world. Do you want to give us kind of a rundown?
Yeah, so as of us recording this, the East Coast ports are still shut down. And I actually wrote an article last year that I've had a lot of people reaching out and commenting on. And I basically put together a framework for how I would fix this once and for all. And it basically comes down to two parts here. The first one is I think they need to pay everybody off. And the second is I think they need to transition the ILA's business model. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically you have this challenge playing out in the ports that is reminiscent of automation and AI and everything that's going to come across lots of different sectors. But in particular, with automation, you have these dock workers that have a livelihood that they've made very good money on. The average wage is somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000, depending on how long you'd be there. And so these jobs disappearing are meaningful. This isn't a cashier job disappearing. And so my proposal or my thought would be that they guarantee every longshoreman $150,000 a year until 2055. And this is, if you until you die or it's 2055, you're going to get this salary. And whether you are working full time at the longshoreman, whether you are retired, whether you're taking that money and starting a business, just make a line item that says we're going to pay you this amount, for the next 30 years. And there are about 65,000 ILA members in the US, and it would cost about $10 billion a year if everybody took this package. Now, realistically, the thought here is that, your job would have to be automated away. You can't just work for one day with the ILA and then quit. But if we had something in place where, someone worked and, up until the day that their job was automated away, they were working hard, doing their best. And then after their job got automated away, they got this 150K. You change the incentives. And so I would estimate that about $2.5 billion a year is what we would spend on all this. So, call about a fourth of everybody coming through. But what you're going to do here is you're going to change the incentive structure. And suddenly you have all of these workers that are going to be the ones pushing for automation. They're going to be the ones that are saying, hey, you know what? I really don't think we need this guy over here. Or, you don't need my job. Or, hey, why don't we work to try this other thing faster? And so you're going to change the paradigm where these workers are going to be the ones that are all about the automation. And it'll be the business owners who are like, well, I don't know, what's my ROI on that? And so you're going to change the paradigm completely. The second piece is what do you do with the ILA? So this is a business that makes money by collecting dues from its members. And if there are no members, it's an existential threat to them as a business. And the ILA is not going to go in and start organizing Starbuckses, for example. They're always going to be tied to longshoremen or to international trade and ports and things like that. And so what I think they should do is we should be helping the ILA transition to becoming not a union, but a standards organization. So the company that starts to set the rules, the guidelines, the testing, the implementations as it comes to automation. This could be something where maybe they become the standard bearers that certify that this equipment is designed properly, that it's maintained, that it's functioning properly. And what you'll do here is you'll allow the ILA to be a relevant voice in the ecosystem for a long time. And so they find they still have a purpose. It's not an existential threat of we're going to go out of business, is what it is. So again, a bit of a controversial take, but if you were to offer any longshoreman whose job got automated away $150,000 a year for 30 years, you'd find a lot of people who are now suddenly very interested in automation. And if you actively work with the ILA to help them become the standard bearers for what a safe port or an efficient port looks like, suddenly you change these incentives, and both of these sides are going to be pushing toward the future that we know is coming, but that we also need as a country.
I think that was a great take. I think we got to get you on TV saying that or something. That was a great take. They need to listen to you over there. I mean, it's crazy because at the end of the day, I think these rising costs are going to be passed on to consumers, right? And I've seen some stuff on Twitter where you see the kind of union heads driving a Bentley and he's got this like huge mansion and it's like, all right, these guys are making money here, right? And it is a business, as you mentioned, and so I think you're right in terms of how do you align their incentives with the future of automation, right? Because I know part of what they are pushing for is saying, hey, no robotics, no automation, we don't want any of that, which is obviously the opposite direction that ports should be going, basically.
Yeah, you see the increase in international trade. We have more port volume now than we did a decade ago. And you see, a shrinking working age population. So you just look at the demographics in 20 or 30 years, and we're going to have automation. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let's dive in here. Aaron, do you have a cat or dog? I know I've seen a cat, but I'm not sure if you have a dog.
We don't. I would say that I'm a dog person. My wife does not like dogs. She's more of a cat person. So we compromised and we have a cat.
There you go. Well, that's a good balance. For me, my girlfriend and I have a little Frenchie named Nazca, named after the Nazca Lions in Peru, actually. And growing up, I was actually not a pet person at all. Like both my parents were allergic to, animals with fur, basically. So we didn't have any dogs or cats. And I actually have come to really admire and love my little dog. Like it's kind of crazy because if you asked me this like 5, 10 years ago, like I would have said like I don't quite understand the relationship. But now what I realize is that people love coming home to someone that is always going to be excited to see you, that has unconditional love, and I think that's really where the bond stems from. And so the company we're covering today, the Farmer's Dog, is really the fastest growing dog food company I think ever. I mean, they've really kind of changed the script on how you feed your dog. And I know for our dog, for Nazca, we at times would give her kibble, and we've tried Farmer's Dog, and now what we've done is actually we just like get kind of those like massive jars of meat from Costco and rice, and just actually make her like a real kind of meal, which is kind of crazy thinking about it. But our little Frenchie eats well. So I think, Farmer's Dog is just such an incredible company that we're going to cover today. I'm super excited. And Aaron, as a little teaser, has a history working alongside them in the early days. We've got a lot of interesting tidbits to uncover that Aaron will hopefully share. And I guess before we dive in, I know I'm really curious about the history of pet food. Aaron, do you want to kind of start with an overview of like how did actually, pet food and dog food really get its roots and start?
Yeah, so I didn't recognize until we did the research, but dogs have been domesticated for over 30,000 years. And for context, that's about 10,000 years longer than humans domesticated horses, cows, sheep, like those sorts of things that, would be on old McDonald's farm. And for 30,000 years, we didn't really have a pet food industry, but that all started to change a little bit in the mid 1800s. And this was where we had kind of the birth of commercial pet food. And there was a businessman named James Spratt who created the first commercial dog biscuit. And the insight that he had was he recognized that stray dogs on the ports of Liverpool were eating these scrap biscuits that were left over from the workers. And so, yeah, that's what he said. That's what he was going to do.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of pretty amazing to see because obviously before dogs were domesticated, like they just ate whatever they could find, right? That was filling to them, and now it's turning into this huge industry. I mean, what did dogs like really eat before this?
According to a lot of sources, humans mainly left table scraps from humans, or they hunted for their own food. And depending on who you read from the pet industry, they would say, "Oh, this is leading to malnutrition, shorter lifespans, et cetera, et cetera." And this was the prevailing scientific research or understanding for a long time that actually led to companies like the Farmer's Dog unearthing that, like, no, actually, the dog food that we're making isn't making them last longer or as healthy or things like that. But getting back to the history, in the 1870s, Spratt's dog cakes first entered the U.S., and this was really targeted toward wealthy dog owners. And this was kind of seen as the first foray of pet food into the U.S. 1922, the Ken L. Ration Company introduced canned dog food. And this was made of, wait for it, surplus horse meat. And that was what they did. And you just imagine someone saying, okay, 1922, we have a bunch of cars now. We don't have as many horses. And so what are we going to do with these surplus horses? Well, suddenly you have surplus horse meat and you feed it to dogs. That's really where that came from. In 1926, Purina made the first dog food, and they had a nutrition research institute, and they created a research farm to study canine nutrition and try to see what would be working well, what they can maybe do. Well, things really started to change in the 1950s. This is post-war. We've industrialized as a country, and the extrusion process really came into its own. And so this is how you make kibble. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar, extrusion is where you take a volume of product, you shove it through a pipe, you add air into it, and it helps puff these things up. So think about it, this is how they make Cheerios or Frosted Flakes or other things. It was initially a methodology that was made for cereal, and they used this to start making pet food. And so in 1959, Purina was the one to really lean into extrusion manufacturing, and they became the leading dog brand in the US. 1969, you have a little bit more around standardization around nutritional practices. 1970s, people start to question a little bit what's going on. So we start to see the increase of premium pet foods. And these are things where veterinarians, breeders, groomers, people at kennel are kind of talking about the features and how do you get a better coat? How do you get stronger teeth? Things like that. And then you kind of fast forward all the way to the 2000s to present. And the trend right now is a humanization of pet food. And so you have this massive growth over the last 50 years of people who are focused on kibble and those sorts of things. And now you have humans, their owners, who are thinking, hey, I'm trying to eat organic. I'm trying to eat raw diets or grain-free, etc. Maybe I should be doing that with my pet as well. And so that's really where those things have been.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty crazy because when I think about like dog food in today's world, part of me wonders like how much of this market was kind of just made by these big brands and conglomerates, and how much of it is like actually due to the rising, I think, emotional tie that humans have with their dogs and their pets. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like there hasn't been like a huge quote unquote marketing campaign. Like I think of like diamonds are forever, right? I just think of that in terms of how that made diamonds so prominent for getting married, right? And showing that diamonds are forever. And there hasn't necessarily been a marketing campaign like that for dog food or pet food in particular. But I think if you look at the history and just understanding the history, like there's been this rising trend of kind of feeding dogs more and more like, humans eat, right? And I don't know, is that kind of on par with what you see, Aaron?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, you think about dog food really becoming something that happened in the 20th century. And what other things happened in the 20th century? Well, we went from an agrarian society to one where most people live in cities or live in suburbs. And so, if a dog's going to go hunt for itself. You're going after squirrels, you're going after the neighbor's cat. Like, that's not a great thing. And so I think that the environment that dogs were being raised in changed a lot. They were never meant to live in a Manhattan apartment, right? And they're meant to be kind of out on the farm and hunting or doing things like that. And so I think that's a big factor, is we've changed where we live and where dogs live by extension. And the other part too is, as people change, there was a huge convenience factor where people said, "Hey, I really like this dog, I want to have it, but am I going to order an extra thing of Indian food to feed my dog? That's probably not the right thing to do. We know that if they eat chocolate bars, that can be really bad for them." And so I think that there was an element here where I'd like to think that it came from a good place, where people weren't just trying to say, "Hey, we've got this excess horse meat. Who could we give it to?" It was more of a convenience factor for people who generally cared about their dogs.
Yeah, it's interesting. But if you look at the history of the farmer's dog, so it was started in 2014 by Brett Poldesky and Jonathan Regev. Brett studied at Lynn University for a bit and then Penn State. And he didn't really, he wasn't really a founder before starting the farmer's dog. So the farmer's dog seems to be like his first and, really only business experience, which is pretty incredible to see the scale that it's gotten to. One thing that stuck out to me as I was, reading more about him and his story is that his favorite quote is "Culture eats strategy for breakfast" by Peter Drucker. And Brett just loves this quote.
Classic.
Jonathan, on the other hand, went to UC Berkeley. He was a management consultant at Bain. He, has invested in many different startups as an angel investor and advised many. And so he was kind of more familiar with the startup experience. I mean, he was a EIR, entrepreneur in residence, at Rocket Internet, which is basically that European-based company that kind of takes American-based companies and scales them in other countries, and has had a lot of success doing that. But I think the story is a little close to home for me as well, because Brett and Jonathan met on a trip that they did together in Israel, where they became, best friends basically. And this is when Brett was turning 26. And so, up until that point, he wasn't quite sure what his career would look like. And the story really is rooted in Brett's dog having health issues that lasted almost 2 years. And so they were pretty nasty and related to his digestive system. And it was just like really stressing for Brett, because he felt like his dog was his child basically. And so eventually he saw a veterinarian who prescribed a custom diet that needed to be prepared by Brett at home. And so this was kind of the unlocking moments for the idea for Farmer's Dog, because to create and make this custom diet, it took a lot of effort compared to just giving your dog kibble, right? And it required the right ingredients, and took a lot of time to actually prepare. But what was pretty incredible was that his dog's symptoms disappeared really fast after he was put on this custom diet, because the ingredients just matched up that his dog needed this. And I guess the kibble didn't have those natural ingredients in the food that his dog really needed. And so Brett and Jonathan started talking about this, right? And I think Brett probably shared this with Jonathan and said, look, like, I just changed my dog's diet and it's starting to feel better. And so, Brett and Jonathan realized that there weren't really any companies solving for this problem. And so that's when they decided to start Farmer's Dog, right? And so I think, like, as they say, dog food as we knew it was sold as healthy, but when our dogs got sick, we suddenly needed to cook for our dogs ourselves. And so it was kind of this interesting dynamic where they realize, hey, like, what we're feeding our dogs probably is not healthy, and it's not what we would eat as humans. And so I think this was this kind of like huge unlock for them. And the name came by thinking that they wanted to feed their dogs the way farmers fed theirs, which is like, kind of going back to the roots of being natural and thinking about a dog out on a farm compared to in your apartment in Manhattan or something, right? And so to find, kind of this initial recipe, they reached out to a bunch of different veterinarians across the U.S. And they basically had these veterinarians put together the initial recipes for them. And so when they launched, they had a waiting list, and they created this waiting list even before they started cooking, for the first time. And the waiting list picked up steam, right? People started to talk about it. It got shared in multiple places, and they started to get a lot of requests for different ingredients, different types of meals. The food that you're feeding a small dog versus a large dog is going to be different. And so, I think it was like a pretty on par strategy for that time in terms of building a wait list and then growing that audience. But I mean, what do you think about this strategy, right? Because you kind of have two first time founders here that have this unlock, and it probably sounds crazy to their friends and their colleagues at the time. Like, what do you mean you're going to start cooking food for dogs? Like, how does that make sense? And I mean, to me, I love this initial pre-launch strategy, but I mean, it is pretty unique. Aaron, what's your take on that?
I think it's brilliant. And honestly, this is the way that you should start a company in the 2020s, right? You have an idea, you have a thesis, run some Facebook ads, run some Google ads, see if people are opting into this sort of thing. And you have to be careful about this. You can't say, oh yeah, give me this money right now and I'll give it to you eventually. That's called a scam. You don't want to do that. But if you're upfront and say, hey, we've got this service, we've got this offering, join our wait list, we'll email you when it's ready. Like, you can start to look at these things and test things. And you got to keep in mind, like, for most people, even if it starts out as a side hobby, starting a company is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week sort of endeavor. And before you're about to invest that level of emotional just energy into doing something, you want to de-risk it as much as you can to know that, hey, this is actually going to be something that people care about. And so I think it's a brilliant strategy and something that more people should do.
Totally. I agree. And I want to follow up with this question because, I mean, like, let's say, Aaron, we said, hey, we want to start making dog food, right? I would have no clue where to start. And I mean, it is pretty ingenious to hear how they started the farmer's dog, right? So they basically rented a kitchen and hired 8 people in Lower Manhattan to help them cook. They could only access the kitchen once every 2 weeks, so they needed to account for that in their forecasting and in their planning. And the subscription model that they started with from day one helped them achieve this. And as I kind of mentioned, the size of the dogs is really relevant, obviously, to the amount of food they need. And so the first deliveries were actually done by Jonathan and Brett's wives because they got sick kind of during the process. And they talk about how stressful this was to be managing the kitchen, getting the right ingredients, putting the food in the actual bags and then delivering the food to their initial customers. I mean, you can imagine how much was going on for them. And I think that's kind of like what a lot of times people don't realize. I think in today's world and market, a lot of people glamorize what it's like to start a company. But as you mentioned, it's like there's always something to do and it can be very overwhelming very, very quickly. And one of the challenges that they faced is that human food factories were very hesitant about working with them because they were like, well, dog food and human food is so different right now. We don't want to be known for making dog food if we're making human food. And so this was a big challenge for them because every kind of food factory they reached out to was like, no, we produce food for humans, not dogs. And every dog food factory they reached out to was like, no, what do you mean you want to create like human grade food for dogs? Like, that's not what we do. And so there was this kind of huge difference between the kind of dog grade and standard and the human grade and standard. And they really, as a brand, I think their ethos was trying to raise the bar for dogs, right? And I think like this was one of the big challenges that they had to overcome. I mean, Aaron, you were kind of with them as they were overcoming
Mhm.
this. Is that right?
Yeah, I was there, and I'll go into a lot more detail, I guess, later on. But I think the important thing about how they made this transition was they didn't do it all at once. They didn't go from putting up a website, getting people to sign up, and then trying to make 10,000 pounds worth of food. As you mentioned, they took their time. They started cooking in their apartment first, then they found a commercial kitchen. And it was only until after they had some history, they had some subscribers, they had some real volume they could take to the factory that they could have these conversations. And so, you know, when you have like actual dollars that you can give the factory in a month or two from now versus hypothetical, they tend to pay attention a lot more. And you're able to say, here's my forecast, here's what we're expecting, here are our specs. And some people can get over the challenge of making dog food.
Yeah, and I think kind of the beautiful part about the business that I think we have to mention is you think about, Aaron, if I said, hey, we're going to start a meal subscription company and give people the same meal, you know, every single meal, you'd be like, that's crazy. Like no human wants to eat the same thing every meal.
Unless it was tacos. I
Yeah.
think I might be interested in signing up for tacos.
All right. All right. We'll get you on the taco subscription. But, they say dogs are really the perfect subscription customer here because, you think about it, they eat the same thing, the same amount every single day at the exact same time. I mean, that is really just a beautiful part of the business. And they, with this model, were profitable right from the get go, which is pretty incredible for a startup brand like this. And so, I think it's this kind of dynamic of, they wanted to bring the standards of dog food higher, right? Before this, Aaron talked about the history of dogs eating, leftover horse meat or, canned kibble or whatever it may be. And so their ethos is really real, actual fresh food for dogs. Every pet parent wants to give the best, of food to their dogs. And, their whole process, I don't know if you've been on the farmer's dog and kind of gone through their flow, but it is pretty intricate. I mean, I've been on
Mhm.
there when we got Nazca, some food from Farmer's Dog, and you basically fill out this very detailed questionnaire that helps you understand or helps them understand who your dog is, what they weigh, what they've been eating, what their kind of meal schedule is like. And the questionnaire is very mindful. Like it makes you feel like they really do care, and they learn a lot about your dog. And so the food is pre-cooked. I do want to mention that the food is pre-cooked, but basically you can microwave it if you want to heat it up and whatnot. But it's just a super easy way to get healthy food to your dog. And what's pretty remarkable too is that their meals are formulated with USDA human grade fresh ingredients. And I think that's like probably was new for the industry. I mean, maybe there was some sub niche that was already doing this, but to do this at the grand scale was pretty incredible. And the prices obviously depend on the dog size and their breed. To give you kind of a quick overview of this, like some people say it's expensive. Like of course for a Great Dane it's going to be expensive, right? I mean a Great Dane is a huge dog. Cost per month with the farmer's dog averages like $517, but for a smaller dog like a Chihuahua it could be as low as $42 per month. So I mean, look, I think it's obviously on the more expensive end compared to kibble, but I don't think you can't compare this to kibble, right? And so, I mean, I think if you just go through their onboarding flow, if you're an e-commerce founder right now and you're listening to this, I would just recommend going through their onboarding flow because it is such a education to help you understand how personable they make you feel, when they get to know your dog and go through this process. So I love it. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and they are very transparent about pricing once they understand who your dog is. So it's pretty amazing if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's lots of things that we're going to point to throughout this episode that highlight why the farmer's dog is as successful as it is. And I think you nailed one of them is this onboarding flow and the attention to detail that they have that is not only helping make the transactions smoother and making sure they have the right amount of food, but it's also like part of their brand. It's part of that education where, you go elsewhere and it's like, hey, yeah, here's a scoop of kibble and there you go. And that works. They're kind of walking you through all these different things, educating you as you go through it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, they were actually the second client of Izba, right? I mean,
That's
tell us
right.
more, Aaron. I mean, I want to dive in now to kind of the personal side and the story and uncover, the second client of Izba here. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I've been a fan of the Farmer's Dog for a while, but yeah, I started working with them right after they raised their Series A, and the brief was basically like they felt that they had product market fit, but their supply chain couldn't support any new subscribers, and so they just raised $8 million, $10 million, whatever it was, and they couldn't market. They were literally just doing everything they could to support their existing subscribers, and so I worked with them for about a little over 6 months in total, pretty exclusively on just that, and was lucky enough to rebuild their entire supply chain and their customer service team. So we looked at developing a new framework for how they thought through inventory when it came to how much they should hold, how do you deal with the shelf life, how do you deal with the cash outlay, how do you think about capacity and being able to balance all that. I helped them move from their commercial kitchen into their first factory. And so all of that fun stuff that went on with taking something that worked in a commercial kitchen and trying to get it to a point where it can be manufactured at scale. We helped move them into a bi-coastal frozen fulfillment network with a provider that had a really strong performance. And we basically just restructured how their customer service team was operating and put metrics in place and had them think through, here's how the headcount needs to grow over time. And so they've grown well beyond any of the work that I've done at this point. But I definitely was very fortunate to be working with them at that given point in time.
Yeah, I mean, so with that said, do you have any particular memories that stand out from that time? I mean, you were there so early, but I'm curious if anything really sticks out to you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot. So I was living in New Jersey at the time and was commuting into Williamsburg, and it was a few times a week. So I got to know the team really, really well. And they actually ended up offering me a job, which in retrospect I probably should have taken. But I was able to help them find a very capable woman who took over and ran the operations for a long time. But the first thing that I think of when I go back to that time is just how impressed I am with Jonathan and Brett. Uh, they are amazing people, amazing human beings. They're very good, very smart. They care about people, they care about dogs. And we would, go do something and try to figure out some strategy. And then it was like, all right, let's go get lunch. Let's go take a break. Let's go for a walk. Let's go do these things. And I really came to value them as friends. I remember when I would go to the office, their dogs, so Buddy and Jada, would come in and they'd be there to greet me. And Buddy was always very happy to see me. And it was just a nice way to come in and say, okay, I'm here to do work, but there's a dog here, so you've got to be happy about it. I remember there was a big donation that they had done. They were donating things for a shelter, and they had all this product that had been arrived from different folks. And I remember being able to show off my Tetris skills by loading the truck for them. That was a fun memory. And then there was always these funny times where we would see a celebrity order come through and be like, wow, that's where so-and-so lives. And it was always kind of be a bit of a joke, but it's just kind of the traction they had. But just a fantastic company, just fantastic mission. I enjoyed eating the dog food when I had time, and just working on their supply chain.
That's pretty incredible. And I mean, one thing you mentioned that, maybe is a little personal to you, but, I think it's worth asking, and we don't have to talk about too much, but you mentioned, I regret not taking a job with them, right? And maybe that's because we'll talk about the scale that they're at today. But I mean, do you want to talk about that briefly in terms of how maybe life would have been different?
Well, look, I'm not one that's super big on regrets. I think that everything happens for a reason. Had I taken that job, there's a strong likelihood that I'd still be there. And so certainly the equity amount would have been life changing. But as it turned out, my path was a different way. I ended up taking another role at a different company that ended up being one of the most stressful periods of my life. But that experience pushed me into wanting to work for myself, wanting to start Izba, and everything else that has come since then. And so, I've learned some really valuable lessons along the way because of that decision and where it is. But looking back, I mean, given the choice and everything, I don't know if I'd make a different choice. But I have learned that, like, when you find a place with people you want to work with, you got to cling to that place, right? Who you work with and that sort of factor is so much more important than a title or money or anything else like that, because it becomes your life, right? You want to spend your life with people who make you feel good and you feel like you're making a difference in the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I feel like I'm with you there, where you can't live a life of regret. You can live a life of learning and lessons, but I don't think you can live a life of regret. I think that's a really really good takeaway there. But I will mention now the company Milestones, which is probably why maybe Aaron says, okay, this stock would have been life changing. So 2016 they raised a seed round for $2 million, led by Forerunner. 2017 a Series A for 8.1 million, led by Shasta Ventures. 2019 Series B for 39 million, led by Insight Partners. And 2020 a Series C for 54 million with a undisclosed number of investors. 2022 we estimate that their revenue was about $500 million. And then 2023, I don't know if this was a leak or whatnot, but it was in the information and a few other news sources here. But last year their revenue was supposedly $800 million. I mean, that is just insane. I remember when I saw that article in the information last year, and I was like, wait, what? The farmer's dog does $800 million a year in revenue? Like, that is insane. I don't think, I mean, I never thought they were at that scale. I mean, that's just pretty incredible to think about. And it's just, yeah, it's kind of mind blowing. I mean, I feel like we should just talk about that for a second.
Well, yeah, let's just pause and let that sink in. But I'm curious, what makes you think that they're smaller than they are? Because I have a thought, but I want to hear yours first.
I just think that they're not super talked about, like in the news or in the media. They don't like necessarily disclose all of their funding announcements and whatnot. I mean, like I think you compare them to AG1. Like pretty much everyone on like e-commerce, Twitter, and these Slack groups and stuff that most e-commerce founders hang out on know about AG1. They've broken down AG1's funnel and all that fun stuff. Whereas the farmer's dog, like you know, some people that don't have dogs, they don't even know if the farmer's dog, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not nearly as widespread. And so I think that's partially why it was so like shocking for me to hear last year that they were at 800 million in revenue. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, I think that my perspective is I think it's intentional. And I haven't, I don't have any insight on all this, but I think that they've done such a good job making that connection with the individual dog owner that you think of it as a small company. You think of it as a company that gives you very particular attention and just is there doing that all that customer service. So you call and you work with them, the customer service is phenomenal, as if you're like one of 30 customers that they have. They do other things from a packaging point of view that is like, wow, there's no way that a company at scale could be doing this. And so I think that it's intentional. And their brand is like, no, we're not a mega huge company. We're here, we're just a couple of guys, making some dog food. And, it could be the same thing as if we delivered it to you, from our apartment, but, we just happen to have FedEx do it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, and the farmer's dog is definitely like on trend, right? If you look at kind of the mega trends going on at large in the pet food industry today, so about a third of pet food product introductions in the last 5 years were from new companies or brands, which is much higher than what we see in human food. And the premium sector of the market seems to be the fastest growing. And I think these like personalized diets for pets will always remain relevant. There was a study in the UK that found that 62% of pet food buyers agree that their pet would benefit from losing some weight. And like DNA testing has also, risen a lot here. Like there's Embark DNA, which is kind of like 23andMe for your dog. There's a lot of these. And so I think there's just this trend towards natural product and, dog parents valuing the food that they put into and feed their dog a lot higher than they did in the past. And so I think there's just so many rising trends that the farmer's dog is on par with and that aligns with. And I mean it's pretty incredible because now 23% of pet owners in the US look for products with a limited ingredient list, which I think reflects that kind of rising trend in humans too, right? Like I talked about Siete chips, at the beginning in my tidbit. And it's because, I want a limited ingredient list. I don't want all these different, oils and whatnot and grains in my chips. And I think that's reflected on what I feed my dog too. So it's pretty incredible just to see how kind of the industry as a whole has changed too.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to continue that way, or do you think that we're kind of peaking with all of this type of trends and we're going to revert back to cost or convenience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a subset of the market, right? It's still a very small sector of the market. And I think even if you compare like Siete, right, 500 million in revenue, it sounds like a lot, but you compare that to like Frito Lay's, like that's nothing, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar to me with Farmer's Dog. I mean, I'm sure if we compared, the 800 million in revenue that the Farmer's Dog does to the biggest producer worldwide of kibble, it's probably like, a small percentage of that. And so I think it's just interesting to see how that dynamic is kind of rising with the way humans think about their food as well. So it's interesting to see. I mean, I think it's on trend, but yeah, I mean, do you know how much kibble is sold in America?
Yeah, so I just did a quick search. So Purina which is number one, does $21 billion a year.
Right.
Mars, which is number two, does 20 billion a year. So yeah, you look at this in context, and it's very, very different.
Right. I mean, it's only like less than 10% of what the biggest companies do. So, I mean, still incredible to hear and see. I love this trend as a dog parent myself, but yeah, it's interesting how it's kind of reflective of the human trend as well a little bit. But let's talk about their supply chain. I mean, what unique aspects of their supply chain stuck out to you?
Yeah, I'm going to stay very high level of this just because they have been a client and don't want to say anything I shouldn't. But I think that the takeaways here is first for people thinking about doing something like this, cold chain and food are always the most difficult verticals to deal with. It is very difficult to deal with the temperature control, especially in a D2C environment, all the way from factory to customer. It's very difficult to deal with something where taste is an element. So dog food's probably a little bit easier than it is, human food. But the challenge that they've had and other companies have had is being able to find manufacturers who do this. And so, publicly written, they reached out to 200 different factories before they found one that was able to work with them. And they're looking at growing with that base and building things out. The other challenge that you're going to have is just shelf life. Not only from a cash perspective. Let's suppose you had infinite cash and you said, I've got a factory that can make 10,000 pounds. Well, if I only go through 100 pounds a week, 10,000 pounds are going to last a long time. And you add in a shelf life component in there, you have to build something so that you're producing enough regularly, so your MOQs have to be low enough. But then you also just need to be to not like have it sit there for a long time. And so this is a very difficult challenge when you produce a widget, right, that doesn't have any regulation, it's not lock coded, and it doesn't have an expiration date. You can build an infinite number of them, and worst case, keep them in a storage unit until you need them. That's not the case with food, and so that's just a very difficult thing to do. As of 2021, they still did not own their own factory, and the thought was that they didn't want to necessarily. They want to produce their food in a factory alongside human food, and the idea for this is actually pretty interesting because they want to ensure that regulators are checking on their factory. Again, if it's a dog food company, the FDA doesn't care. They're not going to come in and take a look at it. But if you're producing something that a child could eat, the FDA cares about that quite a bit. And so they're actually going to a place that's more regulated because they see that as a way to maintain the quality of what they've got.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and they've intentionally been profitable since day one, right? So the subscription is relatively expensive. It started out even more expensive than it is today, and they did that with intention by going after affluent customers that could afford this product, right? And so their strategy was to have positive unit economics from day one. You hear a lot about subscription companies like and their payback period being 3, 4, 5 months, but they were profitable from day one with their customers. And because they started out producing just in Brooklyn in that immediate area. When customers started to order from California, they had their customers pay for that extra shipping cost, which I think a lot of brands are scared to do. But obviously makes sense for them. If they want to stay profitable, they're not going to incur those costs themselves, right?
Yeah. And again, this intentional profitability, was well ahead of its time. It's weird to say that, but, most of the companies that were started in 2014, 2015 had the mantra of, we are going to grow as fast as we can. There'll always be more VC money and we'll figure out profitability later. And they took a different tact and they said, nope, like we want to own more of this company than we want to sell. And we want to be around for a while. So I think owning that profitability from the beginning was an important piece.
Yeah, and I think a lot of e-commerce founders are probably wondering, like, are they on Recharge? Are they on Stay AI? Like, what subscription management tool do they use? And they actually built this in-house themselves, which is pretty incredible and a lot different than you hear most brands taking on. The meals are basically the same size from the factory across different flavors. So big dogs may get 1 or 2 whole units, while the small dogs may get part of that unit. So it's just interesting how they've been able to piece together technology with their manufacturing partner and with their customers, of course, too. So I think it's just pretty incredible how they've gone about their supply chain. Instead of the pricing naturally pushing towards small dog owners to order monthly or longer, and bigger dog owners to order more frequently. It's kind of a interesting dynamic considering if you have a small dog or large dog. And they also streamline fulfillment, with a strong timeline and just meeting deliverables. And I think it goes to show like there's so much mass personalization that goes on here because each dog may be different. And I think that's in large part why they decided to build their own, subscription management tool, because there's so many different variables here that they have to cover. And probably one of those tools like, Stay AI or Recharge out of the box just wasn't going to fit for their needs. And I don't even know if Stay AI was around back then. I think Recharge was, but anyway, yeah. So it's just interesting to see how their supply chain is pieced together, right?
Yeah, and I think the most, you've talked about kind of the intentional profitability. We've talked a little bit about the intelligent subscriptions, but I think the most impressive thing about their supply chain, and what I use them as a case study for when I talk to Fortune 500 companies, is the mass personalization effort that they do. And so if you order the farmer's dog, you're going to notice that your dog's name is printed on every package. And just think about that for a moment. And how many dogs are out there, right? And just all those sorts of things. Well, this was something that started from the beginning. And in an effort of doing things that don't scale, they started by writing the name of the person's dog on the package before they delivered it. And eventually they turned into printing those labels and things like that. But they have figured out a way to do this at mass scale. And so you think about this company being, feeling small. This is a way that they feel small. And other companies are like, hey, I don't know how to do this. And, it's a very difficult thing to do, to be able to say, all right, we're going to match up your order with your dog on these items, and they're going to go out. And it happens flawlessly more often than not.
Yeah, I do wonder. Well, I guess they wouldn't pre-print those labels because I think it also has like the ingredients and food on the label too, if I remember. But they probably know. Okay, there's 10,000 subscribers that have the dog name, Rip, and there's 5,000 that have the dog name, this, and it's just I don't know, interesting tidbit as they grow.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it that way. You wouldn't do it that
Yeah.
way. I think there are elements here where you can think about postponement and when does the dog name go on there versus the label and those sorts of things. But it is a technical solution, but you have to understand your whole supply chain. You have to be able to associate orders with those sorts of things. But it's certainly a cool thing that they do.
Yeah, yeah. What's next for Farmer's Dog?
Well, as of December 2023, there was some rumbling about raising some more capital. And the thought would be that this is going to dramatically raise their valuation. And this could, the commentary in the article that I saw was about how if there's a company that's going to reset valuations and show that, hey, no, you can actually keep growing your valuation, the farmer's dog is probably it. So there's an element here where if they do raise, I think that one, they'll signal to the market that it's okay to go out and raise again. And two, people will be able to point to it and say, hey, valuations don't have to come down, right? They can go up. And so it's interesting because I think that there's a lot of, they're big enough now where they've separated themselves in this fresh frozen space. And some of the majors are starting to look at this and say, all right, like $1 billion in revenue, we might be interested in that. Let's talk about frozen and chilled pet food.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
what do you think?
I think that I think like Mars or one of these big companies should just acquire them. To be honest, I mean, and when I think about that, and when I think about okay, like why am I saying that? I think about my friend who is close friends with Evan at Snapchat, and Snapchat could have sold to Facebook, I think, for $3 billion, I want to say, and Evan probably would have walked away with about $1 billion from that. And instead, he said, no, we're going to do this ourselves. We're going to go public. And now he runs, I think Snapchat's worth like, I don't know, $6 to $9 billion or something. He's probably got like, $2.5, $3 billion of net worth from that, which is incredible. But like, you think about the amount of stress, the amount of hair that he's lost, and the amount of headaches that he's had to gone through running Snapchat as a public company and continuing to scale it. Whereas like, if he had just taken the money, I think he would have had a much better lifestyle for himself and still would have been rich beyond, his wildest dreams. So, I mean, look, I'm sure the farmer's dog will be a target to be acquired by one of these larger pet food companies. And I'm sure internally, a lot of their board members are going to say, hey, let's, continue on our own. Let's, we've got outside investors. Let's do this ourselves. But from my perspective, founder to founder, I mean, is it going to be worth the stress and headache and, the all that goes into, continuing to run the company as an independent and, probably eventually going public themselves. But, that's something they'll have to decide.
Yeah, take the bag, in other words.
Yeah, yeah, take the bag. That's a good way to end it. So
Yeah,
we
I've
appreciate
actually got a
everyone.
different take
Okay.
for what I think they should do. I think that this is a private equity play. And so I think that an outright acquisition by a Mars or a Purina, Procter and Gamble, um, I don't know if that would be a successful acquisition, right? Because they've built their business around, hey, we are pushing off against these guys. And so you think about it from a cultural point of view and from a branding point of view. Uh, there's a world here where I don't know if that would fit. You think about Campbell's Soup just bought Rao's tomato sauce, and there was a huge outcry where people were like, hey, you sold out, and like Campbell's is going to ruin this. And so I think that there might be some of that in the water when it comes to the branding. The second piece of why I think that kind of acquisition wouldn't make sense is it's a completely different supply chain. And so you think about, Mars and Purina are built around kibble and those sorts of things. To bring on a fresh frozen network that can't run through the same distribution is going to be difficult. And so then it's like, all right, what are your options? Well, I think if you go public, you're a profitable company. And so, that is a very good outcome that can happen that way. But I think that the issue you're going to run into is so much of the farmer's dog is mission driven, and they want to make sure that they're making a big benefit to dogs and improving things. And I'm concerned that 5-10 years into the future, if you're a public company, how much does that get changed for I need to hit my quarterly dividend or I need to take cash out? And so my thought here is that you should, there's a private equity transition where everybody can get their bag. Somebody has a profitable company they can manage, and they can grow this as a family holding or something. So maybe the Mars family buys it, but doesn't roll it into Mars proper. But that would be my suggestion for how I go about doing it.
That's a good take too. Well, I appreciate everyone listening to this episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Izba and Sourcify. Aaron and I always love to hear from our listeners, so let us know what you think on Twitter, LinkedIn. We always love hot takes. And please leave a review, subscribe, share with a friend. We're growing. I mean, we are growing our audience quite a bit right now. It's been pretty cool to see, so we appreciate all the new listeners. And if you have a company you want us to cover, just let us know. We're always open to covering new different companies. So thanks again.